And I'd like to spend today talking some, from my perspective, about what happened in the most recent legislative session. The previous session, we had 95 Republicans and 55 Democrats. This session, we had 67 Democrats and 83 Republicans. Still obviously not fairly evenly divided, so to speak, but it made a significant difference when you had 12 new Democrats present to moderate what was going on in the House. And we had a common agreement among the top three leaders, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House, to stay laser focused, especially in the House, I would say, which I'm a member of, so I prefer them, but to stay laser focused on two major issues, that is school finance reform and property tax reform. We also, of course, had a new Speaker of the House. And though I was not one of the original supporters of the Speaker, as he well knows, I am a fan of how he handled this session. So we had elections, we had a new Speaker who was the right person for the job, and we also had a surplus in our budget. The comptroller came in at the beginning of session giving us our biennial revenue estimate, and we were going to have significantly more dollars with which to spend. And basically, we spent all of that on public education. So I think, yeah. I think this is one of the most critical things we worked on this session. Last budget, the budget that we passed in the previous session that we're still working under right now because our fiscal year doesn't end until the end of August, we actually budgeted for your property taxes to increase by $7 billion. We counted on that and baked it into the budget, and we actually then did not spend that entire $7 billion on public education. We used your property tax dollars that were increased because of the values going up. We used that increase of $7 billion to help cover the student population growth that we had and to cover the cost of charter schools. And then about $3 billion of that $7 billion got used for other things in the state budget. It's like a windfall for the state. The state was using your local property tax dollars to help pay for other things and not being transparent about that. We want our tax dollars to go to what they're supposed to go to. And in this case, we're talking about public education. We're paying more and more in our local property taxes, and we're not getting any more to our local schools. There's a problem here. So we were pretty much forced into dealing with this time and had the support of leadership to make this happen. We always have to compromise at the legislature, and there's still a lot of what the House proposed that's in the final bill, HB 3, that was passed, that includes not only some reforms to how we fund our schools, but also into compressing some of the property tax rates so that your property taxes can be lowered a bit. So we ended up appropriating $11.5 billion to public education, partly going to the schools and partly going to property tax reduction and switching the method of finance there. This was very significant in a lot of ways. I mean, I really am pleased. It's a start. So some of the things that were a part of the school finance, there's an additional $2 billion directed towards teacher compensation, which means raises for our teachers, nurses, counselors, and librarians. There's supposed to be an emphasis on those who have more than 5 years of experience. This is one of the biggest parts that we were supportive of. Full-day pre-K for eligible students is finally going to be a part of the school funding formula, and that is huge. This is not mandatory full-day pre-K for all kids. It's not universal pre-K, but it does expand full-day pre-K to all eligible students, such as those that are in poverty, that are homeless, that are English language learners, a variety of categories that allow you to participate in this free program. And we also had increased funding for poverty. Recognizing that 60% of the students in this state are low income. There was a cap put into this bill that caps our local school districts at 2.5% revenue growth. That's not realistic given the growth in a lot of our communities. It's also not realistic if you think about the fact that if we're going to maintain the formula and make sure all the money's there, if we're going to cap and bring down your local property taxes, we've got to replace that money with something else. What does that leave us? Where are we going to find the revenue to sustain the public school finance reforms that we just put into place? This is going to be our challenge, and we have to use this interim to have some real honest discussions with everything we can think of put on the table to figure this out. What we did in the school finance reform was really good for Austin and for our Central Texas school districts. We increased the basic allotment, which is the place we start with schools, from $5,140 per student to $6,160 per student. That's a big bump to just even start with. And that doesn't even count all the weights and things that you apply. AISD's amount per pupil is going up by $1,216 the first year of the biennium and $1,555 per pupil in the second year of the biennium. That's a lot. Because the state's putting more in, the recapture payments are also coming down, and because your property taxes are going to be reduced from $1.08 to $1, you'll be paying less in property taxes and less in recapture. So there are some very specific positive things that are going to be happening here with more money being able to go into the schools, to our teachers, to our staff, and to our students. In Texas, because we have not expanded Medicaid, if you're an adult, you do not get Medicaid in our state unless you're elderly, disabled, or pregnant. So when these women become pregnant and get on Medicaid, they have that coverage for up to 2 months after they have the baby, and then they're dropped. The recommendation was, because these morbidity and mortality issues occur up to a year, sometimes beyond, but at least up to the first year postpartum, that we extend Medicaid coverage for at least a year. That did not pass. That did not pass. We also wanted to make sure we had our children covered. We have had the highest rate of uninsured children in the country. It had been going down with the Affordable Care Act and things that were going on that helped, but this last year, it started going back up again. We are the highest, and now we're actually going back up again. And one of the big things I'm especially interested in was the legislation that was what I consider my high point on sexual assaults. We were able to create an office, actually it's a task force, a Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force in the Office of the Governor. This is huge to me. There's nothing like this in the country. We're going to be looking at how can we use a survivor-centered approach throughout the whole timeline to make sure that survivors are being served, that they have access to the services they need, that we're investing in the infrastructure, which, again, being on appropriations, I feel like I do much more in appropriations than I do by passing bills anyway. We were able to get historic levels of funding in to address the backlog, to increase the infrastructure, expand DPS capacity, get more labs in place, get more people trained, get more SANE nurses, the sexual assault nurse examiners who were specifically trained to do this, get more safe certified facilities where you can go and get these exams, and do an audit of what's going on with our prosecutions to determine where we can impact that.
Thank you, Representative Howard.
Thank you all.